And good day, everyone. Some arts and crafts today. I'm going to be doing that little thumbnail up there on this approximately 6 by 9. I think I'll show the paper. Yes, there it is. And it is actually 7 by 9.5 inches. So that's the paper I'm using. So, first of all, I'm going to build the composition. And what I did was I put a piece of tape across horizontal for the horizon line. And I put it about a third of the way up the page. And now I'm just going to create a building or two and some odd shaped trees to fill out the composition. So this thing is going to be mostly bold colors, not a whole lot of detail in that house. But at this point, I'm just putting it together, giving it a little bit of interest, making the shape somewhat interesting, a little stone wall in there. And then I'm going to put these rather bulbous trees on either side of the house to frame the house and hopefully make a visually impressive composition. So there are just that little outbuilding over on the right just to balance the whole thing. So here's where the arts and crafts comes in. Um, that's ultramarine and burnt sienna. So I'm gonna go wet on dry, go straight onto the paper with a fairly dark mix of gray. So again, it's ultramarine, and I'm just trying to get the right color here by mixing the burnt sienna to go with it. And there, I can start to apply it directly on the paper, so that is wet on dry. And I'm just hoping that I've actually created enough pool of paint there to cover the entire sky. And it looks like it's getting a little bit low, so I'm adding some Payne's Gray into that and a bit more water. So I'm going to darken the upper sky and then drag it all down like a graded wash, I believe you call that. And just drag it down to the horizon line and just have it just a bit lighter at the horizon line. So now I'm mixing up some green while that paper is damp. I want to have a row of distant trees. So I'm taking my gray, which was the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, thinning it out a bit, and adding, I believe that's some sap green I've added in there. And what I'm going to do while the paper is damp, I'm going to add a fairly light wash of that gray-green mix to indicate some trees off in the background. Again, not a whole lot of detail in this painting. This is more or less about fooling around with technique and colors and see what I can come up with. And now I'm mixing up a stronger batch of green. And what I'm using is an old acrylic brush. Don't know where this came from. It's really coarse bristles. And I've mixed up a really dark mix of the gray, which was the ultramarine, and I've added some green in there and some indigo as well. That's what I'm reaching for. And I'm using the still mixing paints here by the looks of it. Yeah, ran out of paint. So I'll get that acrylic brush out again, and there it is. And I'm just dabbing using it's kind of a dry brush approach. So lots of paint, and I'm just putting it on the end of that acrylic brush. And then pushing it onto the page. And that seems to be giving me some definition and a little more texture to those trees that are a little bit closer. And of course, I can't wait to get the tape off of this and to see if my masking tape masking worked. And yes, there you go, thumbs up, it worked. I'll get the big guy going here too. And there it is, also success. So now with everything dry, I'm pulling off all the, I ran into a bit of trouble there. That's the trouble with this paper. I had a bit of a tear there on the right hand side of the roof. It's really sensitive, so I'm going to grab my X-Acto and just clip that off so it doesn't tear into the sky. I won't be painting the house. I'm going to leave the house white. I really want it a real contrast with the background, the sky. So spoiler alert, the house will be staying white, and I think it gives this whole thing a nice effect. So now I can lift the tape off at the horizon. Again, this paper, so knowing how it responds to tape, I'm being very careful in lifting that off. So here we go with the foreground. I mentioned earlier I wanted intense colors, and I really wanted this to be a bold painting, kind of a departure from what I do. So here I am, really thick mix of cadmium yellow for the foreground. And then partway down the foreground, I'm going to add some yellow ochre just to darken it up a bit and bring the darker colors closer to the front of the painting. Just streaking across there, I don't want to overdo it. I have a tendency to go too much when the thing's damp, and I probably should let my phases of the painting dry before I move on, but anyway, that was okay. I didn't go too far into it. Sticking with my bold color theme, I'm going with a really rich mix of, got my giant head in the way there, sorry. It's winter, I'm wearing my toque. So yeah, again, geez, I got distracted. The roof is a cadmium red. And I'm going to leave it rather opaque. When I look at something like this, I feel like taking some of the color off and adding yellow, but I'm going to try and keep this thing opaque and keep the entire painting really simple. I've created a really hard edge up against the sky, so I'm trying to be careful here. If that's a big brush I'm using, it's number 12 round. And I'm going in with cadmium yellow. And what I'm trying to do is not have a white line between the sky and the tree. So I'm trying to paint right up to the edge. I guess when you're painting a house, they call that cutting, I think. Anyway, so let's say I'm cutting the paint right up to the edge and trying not to overlap the yellow with the dark sky. Now, if I weren't filming this, I'd be flipping the board around and leaning right over it and making sure I get right in there. But for the purposes of filming, I'm going to leave the board straight and do my very best to fill it in. So with the tree super wet with the cadmium, and again, it was pretty dense too. It was like almost opaque. I'm going in with the cadmium orange and just dropping that in. And again, that is wet and wet, so it's creating, whatever the paint does, that's what I'm ending up with. And it created some pretty good texture there for me. So I'm going to do the same thing with this tree on the right. Again, trying not to overlap with the sky, and paint right up and remove any white lines. And that's easier said than done, especially when the board's at this angle. Oh, I should note too that I tilted my board. If you want to go back to when I added the foreground, that's when I tilted my board. Just have it up on a slight tilt so the colors would run. And that helps with my trees. See, the orange is pooled at the bottom on the left tree, and right on cue, got a little too much over there, so I'm going to borrow some of the paint from the left tree and drop it into the right. So with everything dry, I'm adding a little more color to the foreground. In this case, I added some water, some yellow ochre, and that is a cadmium burnt orange. Here I've grabbed my fan brush and I've just added a bit of the burnt orange and just tapping in some grass texture. And that seemed to have worked. By the way, with the cameras off, sorry, I dropped in, I hit the background trees with just a little splatter of white gouache. Sorry, I didn't film that. And now with my background more or less established, I'm going to put the trunks of the trees in. Yeah, it looks like I'm mixing up some really dark paint there. Yeah, it looks like I didn't film it anyway. I mixed up some really dark paint, and there's just a combination of ultramarine and the Payne's gray and some purple. I got a whole bunch of color in there to make a really dark mix to have those tree trunks stand out from the background. Now, if this were a larger painting, I might go to the trouble of adding some highlights on the left-hand side of those trunks, but this is more or less just, yeah. Anyway, fooling around with things, and that would have been too fussy, and the area is far too small to go into that sort of detail. So I'm just going to leave it be. Now on the left-hand side of the house, this is a little stone wall, a set of steps that lead up to the side of the house. So I'm going stone color, which is an ultramarine. Now the thing is, I don't want that too dark, because as you can see right there, it looks like it's lost in the background. So I started out with the blue. I want the blue to sink into the paper a little bit, and there I'm lifting out, mopping it out a bit, so the blue is becoming lighter and lighter. And now I can drop in some burnt sienna and other colors. Again, it's a bit dark, so I'm trying to lift out the top edge of that stone step or staircase or whatever it is on the left hand side of the house, just lifting out a bit of color to separate it from the background trees. So while these steps were drying, I mixed up some blue, mostly ultramarine, just a hint of purple in there, and I'm creating a shadow color. So it's kind of going with, it almost looks like a moonlit or a night sky here. So I decided to drop in some intense shadows to really define the house, and I think it really helped this painting. So it's clear from the positioning of my shadows that the light is coming from the left and all the shadows are being cast to the right. Here I've just mixed up some dark paint, again, mostly ultramarine, and I have some Payne's gray in there. And I just painted 4 little frames to indicate where the window is. Not a whole lot of detail, but I think that works. So the viewer knows that, yeah, that's a window. I think I'll do the same thing over on the right-hand side of the house as well. And rather than match it up with the other window, I'm just going to go with 2 frames in this one, so it's a smaller window on the addition. Now on this side of the roof, there won't be shadow cast there, but other than the underside of the roof. So I wanted to put a very thin line because there would be tiniest hint of shadow from light bouncing around and everything, but there would be some shadow over there. And I did want to indicate that there's a roof there. So a bit of cheat going on, but I think that worked as well, keeping the line very small and discreet, but you can see the underside of the roof. And there I just darkened up the left-hand side, made the shadow a bit bolder. I'm pleased with the painting up to this point. I thought the foreground needed to be a bit darker, and I don't want to run into trouble by overpainting it. But I wet the area and dropped in a bit more of the burnt orange and just darkened it up a tiny little bit. This was an afterthought. Seeing as I have shadows on the house, it didn't make sense there would be no dark side or underside of those trees. So I'm painting in a very simple shadow with I'm using cadmium orange and a bit of the burnt orange, just to indicate pretend shadows on those rather ridiculous trees. And I opted to leave, because they're made up trees, I opted to leave fairly hard edge on the underside, the shadow side. And with that being said, I'm going to put a signature on this guy and get the tape off it. And I think we can call this done. And there, what I'm doing, I learned my lesson. I heated up the tape with the heat gun before lifting it off, so it peels off really nice and clean without tearing the paper. And there it is. That was fun. Thanks so much for your support. Thank you for dropping by, and we'll see you again soon.